I'd just like to spend a few minutes talking to you about the importance of technical accuracy in answering your questions. And what we're in effect talking about here are the little details. And getting these things right is all about the examiner, because an examiner is going to read your work, and at the end of the day you want to achieve one thing. You want this person to be very happy. You want this person to look at your work, and one way of getting them happy is to get these little things right. So let's make a start, and we're going to go through 7 points, and the first thing I'd like to look at is punctuation. Okay, so here we are at punctuation. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about full stops, we're talking about exclamation marks, we're talking about question marks, we're talking about quotation marks, and all those things, which are fairly simple things to use, but they can have a big implication on the meaning of your text, and often that's got to do with the use of the comma. Get commas right. Check your commas are in the right space so the meaning is correct. So get that right, and use question marks when you ask a question. Use quotation marks when you're quoting text, and please do not overuse exclamation marks. You're not writing a text message, and you're not trying to be excited about things. This is an essay, an answer to a question. Now let's look at the next thing, and that's about sentences. Now, when it comes to sentences, there's basically a couple of main points, but I suppose the important things is don't use too many long sentences. In fact, try and avoid long sentences altogether. And you don't want to overuse short sentences. So we're getting rid of the long sentence. We're saying yes to the short sentence, but of course it's all about variety and getting medium length sentences and short sentences and using that in a nice, fluent way. Now, and what do sentences form? They form paragraphs. So let's have a look at the paragraph. Okay, I know most of you understand that it's important to use paragraphs, and most of you use paragraphs, but we need to get a few things right. A paragraph, let's look at what a paragraph is not. It's not one sentence. In fact, I'd be starting to ask myself, is this a paragraph serving a function if it's 3 sentences or less? You know, we're talking at more than 3 sentences in most cases, okay? That's what we're looking for. Another thing we don't want is the really long paragraph, so too long. Chances are, if a paragraph is, just pick, I suppose, picking a figure out of the air, if it's more than 10 sentences, there's probably a pretty good chance you're saying more than one point, and that's when you need to split it up into 2 separate paragraphs that deal with 2 separate points. Please do that. Don't make paragraphs that seem to last an entire page. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is a quick look at the vocabulary you use. I suppose there's 2 key aspects to vocabulary. Firstly, we want to see a bit of variety. So repeating the same words, using the same words over and over, or the same combinations of sentences is not what we want. We want to see variety in what you're doing. Another thing I think is important in your vocabulary is that you're getting the right tone. An essay is ultimately a piece of formal writing in which you're responding to a question, and you need to be choosing words that achieve the level of formality that you're looking for. So if you read your sentence and you think, yeah, that's the sort of thing I'd say to a mate down at the bus stop, then you're probably not using the right words in the right way, and you're not as formal as you need to be. Now, let's have a look at the next point, which is about spelling. This seems like a no-brainer. We want to spell words correctly. There's nothing worse than an essay full of incorrectly spelled words. The problem is, or that most people, as they write, think they're spelling words correctly. But the fact of the matter is we often make spelling mistakes, and one of the best and most important ways to reduce the number of spelling errors is by simply proofreading your work. Now, proofreading is an important process, and I think it's important for all of you to leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end of your essay to reread it and look for these sorts of errors, especially when it comes to spelling. That is when you're going to pick them up and you can change them. It doesn't take much time, but it's going to keep your examiner happy. The next part is actually a list of things to try and avoid. Cliches are those tried and tested or almost worn out phrases that are used by lots of people all the time. We're talking about, as a good example, if you're writing in your essay at the end of the day, instead of saying to conclude, and you sort of think to yourself, oh, I'm starting to sound like a football player, or even worse, a football manager, because you're using these types of things, these types of cliches, that someone was like a man possessed, instead of just saying he was driven or he was eager to do something. Getting away from those old phrases is a very important thing. It shows that you're able to describe something by using the language and not these sort of catchphrases. The next part I want to look at is flattery. And what do we mean by flattery? Now, when we're talking about flattery in your essays, and particularly your literary essays, this can refer to flattery of the books or authors. So if you start to tell me what a great author someone was, or, oh, this is a fantastic book, well, I really doubt that that's going to actually add to your answer to the question. We don't need this type of flattery. It will never be the answer to a question. Finally, another something you shouldn't be doing is the use of slang. And I suppose we looked at this in the vocabulary. This is about using appropriate vocabulary. If you're going to say, oh, and he was a really cool guy, or these sorts of things that you hear, that's basically the language of the streets. That's not what we want to see. Unless using something as a quote from the book, and then we're talking about something different. But when it's your language, you need to be thinking about what you're doing. Now we're just going to look at the last thing, which is how to use quotations. Now, I know I've talked about quotations in other films as well, but the use of quotations is a very important issue to get it right. I always think it's important to use short quotations, because by using long ones, you could be inaccuracy could creep into it. So it's important that you be accurate. In other words, don't make it up. If you're going to quote something, then we don't want invention, we don't want misquotes, we want you quoting accurately, and that's why keeping them short is important, because the chance of you remembering very, very long quotes is a little more difficult. And then don't forget, the relevance is important as well. Don't have this sort of list of quotations that you want to put in your essay, no matter what the questions is. No, check it's relevant, that it can relate to the question and the point you're making to answer the question. Now, that's the end of my points on what we call technical accuracy, which applies to any essay really, but it's also important in literary essays, and there are a few specific literary terms here. I'd just like to finish off by emphasizing the best way to improve your technical accuracy is to proofread your work at the end of the essay, at the end of your time, if you've got 10 minutes left. Don't leave early. Stay there, use your time, proofread, and look at where you can improve the accuracy.